I'm Terry Shepard. Being a confident podcast guest is a skill that can be learned. And that's why I wrote How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. It's a sweet and short primer that teaches you about the gear, the appearance, and the messaging that can grab and hold today's micro attention spans and motivate your listeners to take action. How to Become a Dynamic Podcast Guest and Sell Stuff. The digital version is just $1.99 at Amazon. Grab your copy today and sell more books tomorrow.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
There are writers who define a genre, and then there are writers who quietly reshape it from the inside out. James Grady has been doing exactly that for decades. Ever since his breakout novel, 6 Days of the Condor, introduced readers to a world where paranoia, power, and survival collide, later immortalized on screen by Robert Redford. Today, James returns with a story that feels both deeply personal and unmistakably of the moment. In Shadows on Sidewalks, he takes us to a small Montana town where the past refuses to stay buried and danger hides in plain sight. At the center is James Trayvin, a man drawn back home by family duty, only to find himself caught in a tightening web of deception, desire, and looming violence. James Grady, it is an honor to have you in the conversation. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me here. And the honor is really mine that I get to be able to be heard and seen by your fans and your subscribers. That's for a writer who's an isolationist like me. This is an honor and privilege.
You've been shaping the thriller and noir genre for a long time. When you look back in that rearview mirror, what still excites you about telling stories in this genre?
It allows you, when you use thriller or a mystery or any kind of clock-ticking genre, you can show what we all as human beings go through when we get in moments of crisis. It shows that the world we see when we open our front doors and step outside onto our sidewalk might be just a little more exciting, a little more dangerous, and a little more important than we thought it was when we're having breakfast.
That's what fascinated me about James, is his return home out of obligation, but quickly finding himself in danger. What drew you to that idea of home as both a refuge and a trap?
The funny thing is, I was always puzzled by the author Thomas Wolfe, who was huge from the 30s to really the mid-60s. And he said, you can't go home again. And I thought, I understand that. If you leave, things change in your hometown, and that's absolutely true. But for so many of us, our hometowns are part of us and shape us forever. And to go back and confront that, especially with a ticking clock scenario, so the readers will be pulled along through. It's a fascinating attempt for an author, and I hope an incredibly enjoyable ride for the reader.
You and I are both seasoned enough to have attended or at least been invited to a class reunion or two. What was it like to go back to one of those for you? They were very key events. My 10-year reunion, my God, was Linda Levitt really still going to be married to that guy? Did Lynn Markuson really turn that deserted garage into a thriving business all on his own? You got to see all these wonderful things. And you hear, yeah, these two guys are in prison. That guy's got a bad alcohol problem, and we don't know what happened to that girl. So that was really important. But years ago, I did a piece for Parade magazine about going back to an all-class reunion, which if your high school is doing that, please try to go. Because you'll see, I want to say the kids who graduated 4 years before you and 4 years after you
And you'll see their lives, and you'll see that the cultural differences you experienced shaped all of you in different ways. And that is fascinating. So to go back to a high school reunion, it can be traumatic. It can be, I've been told it can be boring. I don't know why that person thought it was boring. It's, you have those moments where it's safe to look back and to say, I wish I would have. And you also get to say, I'm glad I didn't, because you see what's gone on with everybody else.
And as I read your stuff, I am touched by the illumination that we can't blame ourselves for what happened yesterday because we didn't know what was going on.
It's just astonishing to discover what was really going on that you had no clue about. For example, I didn't realize the massive discrimination that was done against one of my classmates who dropped out when she was 16. She had polio, and she had these weird discriminations against her that just basically said at one point, she said, I don't need this anymore, and dropped out. And she was actually one of the smarter kids we knew. And it's funny, from a class a couple years ahead of me, there was this one guy, and I'm not going to give you the name until the end here because he's a famous guy. All right. Nobody knew about dyslexia when you and I were growing up, right? So this guy, I'll just give you his first name now, is Jack. His family was lower class, had a sand and gravel business. They kept socially promoting him because any of the teachers thought, oh my God, if we fail him, I'll have to have him next year. It turned out he was schooling himself on fossils and dinosaurs, and he grew up to be Jack Horner, who was the leading paleontologist. He discovered that dinosaurs are like birds. He was the role model in Jurassic Park. He was their consultant, and he's literally been honored all over the world. If they had a Nobel Prize for paleontology, Jack would have gotten it years ago. To go back and run into him at one of those all-class reunions, it was just, he and I have stayed in touch all these years. But to realize that the kid who everybody thought was going to be a failure turned out to be the biggest success that ever came out of that town, it just is amazing to me.
One of the things I loved about Shadows on Sidewalks was the richness of the characters, including Lana LaBeouf. You describe her as savvy and beautiful, but also in grave danger. What made her such a compelling figure in this story?
One of the things that I wrote this book to hopefully spotlight is on what we call the reservations, or the res for American natives, we used to call Indians. The amount of horrors that the women are going through there, murders, rapes, disappearances, that is a major problem. And I wanted to find a way to do that. And we never get to meet Lana's sister, but she sacrifices essentially years of her life in a kind of creepy way so her sister can safely get out of the violence community that she's stuck in. And you throw that in with, this is going to sound strange to some readers, but beautiful women sometimes have a harder time than you think, And if you're a beautiful indigenous woman, I interviewed several women from various nations, tribes, and the stories they would tell me, like the names they were called. One of them told me one of the guys driving by in a car when she's on the sidewalk and they yell out something to her. She told me that. I was so speechless, I said, I'll have to call you back. I had no level. I grew up watching discriminations against my buddies, but not so much against the women, I thought, now. So I I wanted to create a heroine who was flawed, but driven by better things than what she was doing. And Lana.
We're talking about Shadows on Sidewalks with author James Grady. You are so good at balancing psychological suspense with erotic tension. How do you do that without one overpowering the other?
That is one of the hardest things to do is, oh my God, should I describe the stroking down of a lover's hand down the leg of their lover while there's a thrilling aspect about to happen? Or do I get straight into the thriller? It's like you have to have kind of faith that the reader will be riding with you. And you want the reader to ride with you the whole way. So it's a balance.
And there's this strong sense of moral ambiguity in your work. Do you see your characters as fundamentally good people in bad situations or something more complicated than that?
I think 20 years ago, I'd have given you a different answer. I think now I've seen so many of us have to deal with multiple situations on every level that can throw you into a weird kind of moral ambiguity. Like, I should do this, but if I do that, it'll be better for my best friend, my wife, my child, even though what I did was wrong. And I think we're facing more of those all the time. So I think none of us are inherently good or inherently bad. I take that back. I've met some really bad people, but most of us are just human. And that's a kind of sobering and wonderful revelation at the same time.
The story unfolds in 2024. It's present day for all intents and purposes in a politically and socially charged moment. How consciously do you weave contemporary tension into your narrative?
I think because our world in the last, I would say going back to the COVID, our world has changed so much from the world we grew up in, from the world we helped build, and the world we imagined and wanted. And even though we knew it wasn't real out there, we still had hopes for it. I find that I have to recognize that for our readers. I can't expect them to appreciate, enjoy, or believe my fiction if I don't give them glimpses of the real world they've had to go through. And boy, did I say too much? Did I do too little? What about what happened in Indonesia? Should I put that in? Why the wildfires in Nebraska? You've got to hope that you've created a wheelbarrow of just the right amount of reality being carried along by your fiction.
And your pacing is relentless. What techniques do you use to maintain that momentum while still giving readers emotional depth?
One of my major fictional heroes is Elmore Leonard. And Elmore Leonard was 60% about pacing. Little things like, and this is any of you out there are working on fiction, watch the number of commas you use. Remember not to use a whole lot of adverbs. When you start letting the image that you're trying to create be free of adjectives and adverbs, and in a way, just be itself without any qualifiers. Much of our life doesn't have qualifiers in it. I'm going to the grocery store. There's no need to say I'm going to the grocery store, yada, yada, yada. No, I'm going to the grocery store, man. And that 4-word sentence has character, action, and suspense in it. That was one of the things you learned from Elmore Leonard, and oddly enough, also from classic authors like John Steinbeck. You look at one of those novels that you just flow through and you don't really realize how incredibly wonderful it's being done, is To Kill a Mockingbird. It's full of all these amazing action things with several deep moral cores. And when you're turning those pages, you're not thinking about, oh, I'm getting a lecture, or no, I'm getting no, you're just thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen to Scout? How are we going to get through? It's just, I love to watch the masters at work, and I try to do their education some honor with mine.
We're talking about Shadows on Sidewalks with author James Grady. In preparation for our visit, I was going back over some of your earlier stuff. How have your suspense trajectories changed over time as a writer? Do you sense that?
Yeah. And I noticed this happening, I want to say about 5 or 6 years ago, 3 or 4 books ago, where when I first started out, I was entranced by and felt the important things were the giant political theme or the massive configurations being hit by themes of or acts of right and wrong that were beyond the person. And now, and part of it is going back and rereading the classics, I realize what goes on with the personal lives of my characters and what's going on in shaping their hearts and souls and minds is as important as a SEAL Team 6 has been launched from San Diego to come and rescue whoever. And within that SEALs team, what's going on with those American heroes who had to leave often a wife and kids at home. Their emotional sacrifices and challenges are almost as interesting as whether or not they're going to use a parachute drop or they're going to drop out of the helicopter.
You mentioned Elmore Leonard, and I love his dialogue. Your dialogue is also sharp and purposeful. Do you hear that from the start as you're creating the story, or does that develop over time?
What will happen is you'll know that this chapter has to move from, say, D to H in the alphabet, let's say. But somewhere in there, one of the characters is going to just pop off and say something. I never liked wearing a coat in this kind of weather. And I'm looking at the character who just said that. And that wasn't my idea. That was his. And when the characters rise up and start telling you what they're going to do and saying what they're going to say, that's when you know you should just close your intellectual part of the mind up and just go with them. Let the characters be in charge is one of the things I often tell aspiring authors, because it isn't about me. It's about them.
You've had a long career that many envy. How do you think your audience has evolved over time?
I think the audience has gotten, I want to say, more sophisticated, and I want to say a little more critical, because now you go to a bookstore and you can start from A to Z. You'll find, oh, look, here's Stephen King. Oh, look, there's David Swinson. Oh, look, there's Meg Adler or I.F. Berry. And those authors are all different and tell a different story. Whereas when we were growing up, and I would say right up until the 60s, there were like maybe 10 ways to tell a story. The publishers really wanted to keep you in borders. I remember the head of a major publishing house telling me right after I sold Condor, and this was in 1974, and I'm just a kid. I'm like 25, and I'm going, boy. And I was telling him about this great novel I wanted to write. And he looked at me and went, nobody is going to want to read or hear about Vietnam for 10 more years. And I'm thinking, excuse me, thousands of my generation who've been there, many have lost their lives there. We got mothers, we got fathers. It's the major force going on in the culture. There, publishers would try to keep you in genres. And I was one of the genre busters.
Yes.
They didn't really, why are you doing a book about coal mining when you could keep going? I said, because that's a story that has to be told too. But it'll wreck your audience. They'll find me. And I am so happy that has loosened up a little.
Attention span. Are your books shorter today than they used to be?
They're some are shorter, but I wrote a trilogy of novels about our generation growing up. And one of them, the high school years, that was a thick book. It had to be because high school is 4 years. And I think that I am writing shorter novels now in part because time is moving faster. And I can feel, I'm sure you feel it too, Terry. Wait a minute, isn't it February? No, this is April. You really feel like events in the world and the time that we are within is going faster. And that, I think, helps writers like me, if we're listening and feeling. I think that helps shape us into writing shorter things.
James Grady is our special guest. We're talking about Shadows on Sidewalks, his latest. Every story that we start seems to have surprises along this circuitous road. What surprised you about writing this book?
I think what surprised me most about it was that I wasn't quite sure how it was going to end. And I knew where I wanted most of the characters to end up. But it was until about, 60%, 70% through, they hadn't told me how they were going to do it. And when they did, I went, really, I'm not sure we can get away with doing this. And they said, this is what we're going to do. Okay, so we did it. And that to me that made it exciting for me right up until the last word. And looking back on it, they were right. They just said, we're not going to do a conventional ending. We're not going to do a conventional thriller at the end. We're not going to, and yeah, we got the mystery there, but how we're going to resolve it, nobody's going to be able to see that coming. Sure. It was great fun.
What do you hope people will take away from their encounter with?
It's funny because the title of Shadows on Sidewalks, it's abbreviated to SOS, which I think so many of us want to reach out and say, help. We're in this strange time where, as you've talked about, the world is changing so fast. There are issues attacking us that we never thought of before. And SOS is the come help me. And when my characters realized the title and realized the abbreviation, it helped them realize not only did they need the help that they gave each other, but they're going to need each other down the road. And I hope that readers can get a sense of community and necessity and a feeling that, like, a lot of times in life, we have to admit we need help and hopefully get some and accept the best we can get, because we were all taught to stand up and stand alone, but none of us are alone. If nothing else, we got enemies.
Wouldn't be a good story without some enemies.
Yeah.
You've been interviewed by dozens of people like me over the years. Is there a question that you've never been asked that you wish you had?
Wow. I think a question that people have skirted that you're going to let me answer now is, how did you really become a writer? What were your triggers? And I grew up in a small northern Montana town. And here's where the triggers came that I was so lucky. My dad managed movie theaters, which meant, I had to go see 5 to 7 movies every week for free because I had to help out working around the theater. My mom was a county librarian. So I would have to go up, bring her lunch or whatever, and then just go through the stacks. Where we were was so isolated. We didn't get TV till I was about 10 or 11. Part of that was my dad thought television was going to destroy the movies. We listened to the radio. And my sister, my older sister, and this was all through high school too, if you drove your parents' car out to the rim of the valley and you could turn their AM radio, nobody had FM, you could turn it just right, you could pick out KOMA, Oklahoma City, ULS out of Chicago, a Canadian station maybe, and you would hear maybe the same songs you would hear on closer radio stations, but the idea that, oh my God, that's the Rolling Stones coming to me from Chicago, which is 2,000 miles away. That means I'm in a community of other people. So when I became a writer, I knew I had to be writing not just for me and my family and my friends. I had to be writing for the community of the world, or at least the community who had experienced as much of my life as they did.
How do you want to be remembered?
For having done my best. I created a family motto for my family. It's called do good, walk true, and be happy. That's it. And if I can live up to that myself, which is an everyday work, then I'll have done the best I can. And our grandson is staying with us, he's a teenager, and I said, oh, I forgot to take you to the grocery store with me, because I love going to the grocery store and hanging out with the kinds of people I grew up with. Not the rich, the middle class, the working class. I know the clerks. We joke that, I love the communities we all foster. To watch, for example, I swim at the local YMCA, and there's one man in the locker room who's created a community there of mostly guys over 60. And he knows their names. We now talk. We share things, and we're not massive philosophical things, although I've been in those discussions with those guys. But just having a community and realizing, yeah, we're alone, but no, we're not. That's wonderful. And I hope that I am a little bit able to do that with my fiction.
His newest is SOS. That's how you remember it. Shadows on Sidewalks. And he's our special guest, James Grady. James, this is wonderful. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Thank you for having me, and thank everybody out there who hung in and listened to this silver-haired rascal go off. And Terry was very kind and didn't let, but it was just a joy and a treat and an honor and a privilege to be here.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.